The economic fallout of the pandemic has hit women disproportionately hard. CNBC contributor Joanne Lipman writing today that the pandemic may cause a she-cession, and that could impact diversity in the workplace for years to come. Let's bring in Joanne Lipman. She is Distinguished Fellow for Journalism at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. She's also a CNBC contributor. And Joanne, it's great to see you. Good morning.
Great to see you, Becky. Thanks for having me.
This is not just a theory. This is borne out by the numbers. Women were 55% of the people who were laid off since this all began, right?
That's right. And it's not only women as a whole. If you look at the different groups of workers and the different age cohorts, there's an especially huge differential between men and women at the youngest ages, from 20 to 24, at the older ages, over 50, women of color. Also, it's a huge issue. And a big piece of it is that women are overrepresented in the industries that have been hit the hardest. And we're talking about things like hospitality and travel and restaurants and childcare. And they also make up more than 60% of the lowest wage earners. And then there's this added wrinkle, Becky, that I think you know well, I know well, which is that women, it actually does fall on women disproportionately at home during this time period, the homeschooling, the cooking and the housework, et cetera, the child care. And these are all issues that my concern, I will tell you, having worked in this area for a couple of years now, is that these losses will be sustained. And there was a white paper that came out recently that came to the same conclusion, that these losses will be persistent and they're not going to come back. The reason being that the reason that we have seen gains from women, and by the way, I think you know this, that earlier this year, women had, for the first time, were the majority of the workforce. The problem is that what we see is that the reason that we've made so many gains is because there was such a tight labor market and the unemployment rate was so low. And once you have a high unemployment rate, a lot of these diversity efforts just go out the window.
Joanne, I think you're right that these losses could be permanent, particularly because of the industries that were hit so hard in this situation. But you've got some thoughts about how we might be able to fix some of that. We were talking earlier this morning that if the schools don't open back up, it makes it really difficult for a lot of parents to go back to work. And that includes, of course, a lot of women, working moms. What could we potentially do on that front to try and help?
Yeah, there's quite a few things that we can do, and we have to act now. So, for example, we talked about the schools. What we're not talking about so much is daycare. And as anybody knows who's at home right now with their preschoolers, if you don't have daycare, you cannot go back to work. And currently, you were talking earlier about Tesla, where Elon Musk said if you choose not to come back, you don't get unemployment benefits. Well, there are a lot of parents and mothers in particular. There's more than 11 million single parents out there, the majority of whom are women. If they don't have childcare, they can't go out. So I think we need to look at, when we're looking at these federal stimulus programs, we have to look more carefully at childcare. Can we support childcare? And over the long term, is this something that we need to think about federally funding or federal subsidies the way that we do for public schools? We also need to think about things like paid leave, paid family leave, obviously, is something that's been percolating for a long time. I think we see now more than ever how important that is. Paid sick leave. I mean, paid family leave is something that every other industrialized country in the world has, except for the United States. I also would love to see some guardrails put around how we invest in companies. So Goldman Sachs, we know, took this very baby step last year that they got a lot of attention for, that they're not going to take your company public unless you have one woman on your board. But why don't we extend that? I mean, why, let's have some other, why not? We're not going to invest in your company unless you actually have equitable pay, for example, unless you have equitable family leave, for example. I mean, the fact is we're not going to get this economy back on track if we sort of ignore half of the working population.
Yeah.
Hey, Joanne, just a policy question, and I'm usually very sympathetic to your cause in this fight. In this particular instance, I think you said it because of the way the industries that were most impacted. I think that this is a ramification less of the implicit bias that's in the system, though I don't want to suggest there isn't. you go back and look at the financial crisis of 2008, by the way, and it disproportionately hurt men, oddly enough, for whatever reason. The question I would ask you is, we can do all the things you're talking about, but that doesn't necessarily change the dynamic in these particular industries. In these industries, do you want to change the mix of gender? Is that one of the things you're saying? Because the other piece of this is you look at people who have college educations, don't have college educations. I mean, that's where the true mass gap is in terms of who's been hurt by this.
Right. And Andrew, you're making fantastic points, which I completely agree with. I think the issue is at this point, we are really actually not paying attention to the very basics before you can even get to what you're talking about, which is sort of making a more equitable professional sort of situation. We have to actually allow women to be able to go back to work, right? At this point, we're in a situation where there's a lot of women who, we talk a lot about the people whose health is compromised and how hard it's going to be for them to go back. But what we're not talking about for this half of the population that doesn't have the access that they need to be able to go back. And we're seeing that more strongly than ever.